Welcome. I'm Dr. Saeed Danishmand, my partner, Dr. Brooke Friedman. We're from the San Diego Fertility Center, a clinic that basically will guide you through the process of having your children. We know that having children is an incredible journey of love. I just dropped off my 18-year-old daughter in Northwestern University in Chicago, and so it was a very emotional week for me. I was, crying a great deal, frankly, because, I remember the day when I brought her from the hospital and she was little like this, and now she's 18 and she's telling me, "Dad, bye." So I'm like, okay. So anyhow, we have a great deal of passion for what we do in terms of helping you build your family. So what I wanted to do quickly is to initially talk about the steps in your journey, and then what we want to do is really answer your questions. You want to really get to your questions because I know there's a lot of information you've been exposed to here. There are 3 steps in your journey: the sperm, the egg donor, and the surrogate. So the first thing we recommend for you to do is get your sperm analysis done wherever you live. We also will send you a genetic test kit, a saliva genetic test kit, to test your genetic recessive mutations. Why? Because we want to check your mutations with your egg donor to make sure there's genetic compatibility. That's important because that way we avoid the presence of genetic diseases in your child. And these days we're testing for well over 300 different genetic diseases like cystic fibrosis, thalassemia, mucoviscidosis. These are all genetic recessive mutations that we can avoid if we check your genetics and your egg donors. Once you've now completed your sperm analysis and we've reviewed your sperm test, and it could be sometimes if the sperm analysis is abnormal or there are certain parameters that are abnormal, we will have you take medications, vitamins, or antioxidants before you come to our office in San Diego to freeze your sperm. That's really important for us to have a review of your sperm analysis. The second step is your egg donor, and Dr. Friedman is going to talk to you a little bit about choosing your egg donor and our egg donor database.
So just to build for a moment what Dr. Danishmand said, when you choose to come to the clinic to freeze sperm, 1 day is sufficient to come freeze sperm and do all the testing that's necessary for the FDA. And you can really choose the date that is most convenient for you to freeze sperm, because the success rate in terms of an IVF cycle with frozen sperm is the same as fresh. So you can plan that date ahead of time, choose when that date works for you to freeze sperm. So step 2, like Dr. Danishmand mentioned, was selecting an egg donor. So we're really proud of our egg donor database. So we have hundreds of egg donors that we have medically screened. So why is that important? It's important because a lot of other egg donor agencies have not yet screened their egg donors. They'll present a profile to you, but that egg donor has not been medically screened, so she may or may not actually turn out to be an appropriate candidate. So we've invested a lot of time and resources into screening our egg donors with a blood test to look at our egg supply, an ultrasound to evaluate the ovaries, genetic disease mutation screening, an interview with a genetic counselor to take a family pedigree, a psychology evaluation. So all of that is done before we accept someone into our egg donor database. So when you're looking at our egg donor database, you know that every profile you see has already been medically screened. So you get to choose your egg donor, and if there's a profile that interests you, you can email us and we can help reserve that egg donor for you. A lot of our intended fathers will sometimes email us and say, "I don't know, I'm trying to decide between these 3 profiles, what do you think?" And then it's our job to help you to say, well, let's look at her past cycles. Who do we think is the best candidate for you? So that's really step 2, is selecting an egg donor, and you can also select an egg donor after you freeze sperm. So a lot of our intended fathers come to our clinic to freeze sperm, and when they're with us, we help them to look at the database and meet with our egg donor team to answer your questions about the database. You also have the option of working with an external egg donor agency if you're looking for something very specific, and we can help support you in that. But it can keep costs down and make it easier for you to use one of our internal egg donors that we've already screened. So that's absolutely an option for you. And step 3, I'll turn it back to you if you want to talk about surrogacy.
Sounds good. So, and then step 3 is really once you have chosen your egg donor, once you've frozen your sperm, the egg donor goes through a cycle of IVF. We retrieve her eggs. For many of you, we're going to divide the eggs between 2 partners. For some of you, with 1. And then we let the embryos develop for 5 to 6 days until they get to 128 cells. At that particular point, we can do a chromosome test called PGT to determine the presence of chromosomal abnormalities such as Down syndrome. If you don't do the PGT, it's not obligatory, mandatory, but if you don't do it, Then when your surrogate is pregnant at 10 weeks, we could do a blood test called a NIP test, and we can determine the presence of chromosomal abnormalities at 10 weeks. The only difference is that you have to make sure that you have the same philosophy as your surrogate in regards to interruption of the pregnancy, if you want to stop the pregnancy in case of an abnormality. Now, if the pregnancy makes it to 10 weeks, the risk of a chromosomal abnormality such as Downs is less than 1%. It's very rare, but it's not zero. And that's something we'll talk to you about. What is the advantages of doing it before with the embryos? And what are the advantages of waiting until the surrogate is 10 weeks? So once now you've frozen your embryos, then what we do is we revert back to your agency, and we work with many of the agencies that are here today. And what we want to do is we want to find your ideal surrogate. And ideal surrogate is a woman between 24 to 42 years of age, somebody who's healthy, no medical problems, body mass index less than 32. We want to make sure they've had previous pregnancies without any complications, that they have a supportive family. It has to be someone we can trust, because that person has to take medications, they have to take prenatal vitamins, they have to take good care of themselves. Many agencies will actually go to a surrogate's home and assess her home situation with her family. You know, how neat is her home? You know, how is she, treating her children? I mean, there's a lot of things that are parts of elements of trust, and there are some agencies that actually do home visits, and I think that's really important. And when you meet your surrogate, whether you do it by Skype or in person, you may want to actually meet them and take a look at how they're living in terms of how they're treating their children, diet. All of those factors are really important. So once we've reviewed all the medical records for your surrogate, and we have to review every page of your medical records of your surrogate, that may take a week or 2 weeks. And sometimes surrogacy agencies will ask us, why is it taking 2 weeks to review all the medical records? Well, there may be 100 pages of medical records for each pregnancy that your surrogate has had. So it takes time to review everything in detail. And then once we've done that and verified your surrogate, we have them come to the office and we do all the testing on them. So psychological testing, we test their uterus, blood work for things like blood thyroid, blood sugar, insulin levels. We want to make sure we do a test of their urine for toxicology, for drugs and medications. If a surrogate is telling us they don't smoke, but we find out in their urine that there's evidence of tobacco use, nicotine use over the last month, that's a problem. Again, it's a problem with trust. So once now we've done all the testing and the surrogate has been cleared medically, you finish the legal contracts with your attorney, and then the most exciting part comes when we do the transfer. And many of you will Skype in for the transfer. You can be there, it's almost you're there, we'll Skype you in and you could see the embryo as the embryologist takes the embryo from the lab and then gives it to one of us, and we do the embryo transfer to your surrogate. And I think many surrogates are very appreciative when intended parents Skype in, because they feel like they're part of the process. We even had some intended parents fly over for the transfer itself. And then about 10 days later, we get the pregnancy test. And then what we do is we let the embryos, the pregnancy develop in the first trimester. We monitor the pregnancy in the first trimester until 10, 11 weeks. And then at 11 weeks, we refer your surrogate to her gynecologist obstetrician. And if it's a twin pregnancy, then we typically refer them to a high-risk pregnancy specialist. With the transfer of one good quality embryo, our success rate is 81.4%. 81.4% of the time, we're going to get a pregnancy if we transfer a good quality. And we have a classification system for embryos, so we classify them as good quality, as fair quality, and as poor quality. It's a classification system we actually published on. We published papers on many years ago. So that's a whole journey. I know it's a bit more complicated than that, but I always like to kind of divide every journey, every project into different parts, because it becomes much more manageable and less daunting. With that in mind, what we're going to do is we're going to alternate questions. So with the minutes that we have left, please, we'd like to hear from you and what your questions are. So who'd like to be the first to pose a question? Yes.
Are there agencies you work with, like a general contract, or that you recommend as a partner for you, or is it just outsourced?
So we work with all of the agencies across the US and Canada. And so what we like to do is help refer you to agencies based on what's important to you. So some of our intended parents say, I really want to match with a surrogate yesterday. and I don't mind paying a little bit extra to move forward faster. Some of our other intended parents will say, I don't care if it takes a year, I need the most economical option. And so we can help you in terms of saying, well, these are all honest, ethical options for you, and we recommend that you speak with a couple different agencies to find an agency you feel comfortable with. But we're independent from all of the agencies, so we're happy to support you in working with any agency you'd like. We just want to make sure it's a partner that will help take good care of you. Yeah.
Yes.
So regarding mounting the so you said that currently it's 81%. So if it fails, if the surrogate fails to become pregnant, what happens after that? And just say that when is the second attempt, and also on the aspect of the cost, is there going to be actual cost for the second one?
Yeah, that's a great question. So if the pregnancy test is negative and 10 days after transfer, the pregnancy test is negative, then your surrogate will have her period about a week after. We stop our medications, and then we can restart the preparation for the next transfer. In other words, it'll take about somewhere around 4 to 6 weeks to do another transfer. And remember that on average, you'll have about 5 to 6 embryos in total, good quality embryos that are going to be frozen. And we don't charge any fees for successive transfers. Our regular program that we have has unlimited transfers unless you run out of embryos. And then we have something called a Success Guarantee Program. We only have 2 programs. The Success Guarantee Program means until you have delivery of your baby, then there's no charge. In other words, let's say you use up all the embryos and you still don't have your baby, then either you can receive all the clinic fees back to you, we'll reimburse them back to you, or it's our responsibility to create more embryos and start the journey over. And that's called the Success Guarantee Program. And we can tell you about the advantages of both programs. But we can go through another transfer very quickly if the first one doesn't succeed. Yes?
What was the difference between the testing of the embryo versus the testing of when the embryo was already in the surrogate?
Yep, so the pre-implantation genetic testing, or PGT, is basically we're counting chromosomes. So how many chromosomes are in the embryo? So we're doing that one stage earlier than what's done in pregnancy. So I think what Dr. Donishman was alluding to, in the first trimester, the surrogate can have a non-invasive blood test and an ultrasound to try to evaluate the genetics of the pregnancy. So it's just doing it, but at a stage later. I would say regardless, even if PGT is done on the embryos, we still recommend non-invasive screening in the first trimester because PGT is not 100% accurate. So we still do recommend that follow-up screening just to ensure that everything is normal.
So if you compare like the accuracy of Down syndrome screening between PGT and later on, how would it be?
So the PGT, the accuracy of PGT is thought to be about 95% accurate. So it is highly accurate. But for that less than 5%, we still recommend that follow-up screening in pregnancy.
Yes.
What are the average costs when it comes like to things you do in the clinic, like not the agency, but you as a clinic?
Right. I mean, certainly we have team members. One of the advantages of being the doctor is that we're responsible just for the medical aspects, not the financial aspects of the journey. But I can give you an example. It can range because it depends on your, for example, egg donor. Some egg donors have been through cycles before, so their compensations are higher. Sometimes you decide to do the PGT test we talked about. That's an additional $4,000. So it can range anywhere between, for the clinic, between $37,000, $38,000 to $50,000, depending on your egg donor, whether you do chromosome testing. We connect you to our financial team, and they'll go over everything in detail with you. It also depends on whether we do the program where it's unlimited transfers or we do the Success Guarantee Program as well, because it's a difference of, I think, about $7,000 between the 2 programs. We have 2 more minutes, so maybe 2 more quick questions. Yes?
Any figures on the success rate for embryos in terms of first, second, third embryo? Or I know you talked about an end result of the 81.4% for a good embryo, but just in terms of attempts, so maybe like first plantation, second plantation, any figures around that?
Well, interestingly, for the first or second transfer, the success rates are really the same. are really comparable. If we're in a scenario where we've done 2 transfers and we haven't had success, that's very unusual for us. I mean, most of our intended parents are going to have success the first or second time. If we haven't, that's when we really stop and say, okay, why do we think this is occurring? Do we need to do a reevaluation of the surrogate? Do we need to discuss potentially a new surrogate if we've done multiple transfers? So we don't want to keep doing the same thing if we feel like there might be an issue, but I will say that's quite rare. So most of our patients have success the first or second time.
Yes. Is there something to tell about the pregnancy history of the potential surrogacy mothers? They sometimes also have still a birth wish for themselves.
Right. I mean, for the pregnancy, we just want to make sure there weren't any complications during pregnancy, like diabetes, premature labor. We do accept surrogates who may later on want to have more children. That's okay, as long as they understand this is obviously a surrogacy journey. But they have to have at least 1 delivery and 1 pregnancy without any complications. No diabetes, high blood pressure, premature labor, those kinds of things. And that's why we have to review the medical records very quickly, very in detail. And we're not going to have you pay for the surrogate to come to our office to do all the testing until we verified all the medical records. There's no point. If a surrogate is high risk, we're not going to have them come over to our office and do several $1,000s worth of screening. So we really want to filter in those particular surrogates before. Since we're running out of time, it looks like we've run out of time, we also wanted to introduce you to Richard Westaby. He works for San Diego Fertility Center, works with us. He's a father of 2 children with his husband via surrogacy, and he's actually lives in London, and he travels in Europe supporting intended parents. That's what he does. He used to be in the financial industry, and after his own journey and having twins, they're now 7 years old. They turned 7 years old a couple of weeks ago. He decided that he wanted to devote his life to helping other intended fathers realize their dreams. So please connect with him as well. He is a wonderful, charming, and incredible, knowledgeable man. And I can't tell you how many people he's helped over the years, and they love him more than they love us. So that's what it is. But a pleasure meeting all of you. Thank you.